Hi everybody, this is Miss Peachy from your WCA biology class, and this recording is going to be on the evolution of primates. We are looking still in the unit on animals, and we talked most recently about chordates, the primarily vertebrate animals, but those that have a notochord. And now we're going to be looking more specifically at primates, those animals that are most like us. Okay, and how they've changed through time. So some of the characteristics of primates. Well, we're not actually there yet, I'm sorry. We'll start first at mammals, because primates fall still within this group as well. Okay. Class Mammalia. Order Primates. Okay, so yes, order primates, and then if we continue on with human beings, we belong in the family Hominidae with the genus Homo and species Sapiens. Okay, so here we are looking at the class level of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So we are able to regulate our own body temperature, all mammals. Mammals have body hair. They feed their young with milk from mammary glands. And they're viviparous, meaning that they have young that actually grow and develop inside of the mother and are delivered live. So they give birth to live young that develop inside the mother. So we have two types of mammals, placental mammals. In this case, the mother has a baby develop inside of her. And when the baby is born, it's fully developed. We also have marsupials, which is another class of mammals, another category of mammals. The babies are born, they're a little bit less developed, and they continue and finish their development inside of a pouch. Now, remember, kingdom, phylum, class, order here, order primate. So of the mammals, there are primates. That's one of the orders of Mammalia. Primates have 5 grasping digits, so 5 fingers and 5 toes, an opposable thumb or toe, long, freely moving limbs. It's important to know that primates also have binocular vision, so they have eyes on the front of their head, which enables primates to be able to see in kind of 3 dimensions, have depth perception, and a relatively large brain for the body size. Looking at some examples of primates' hands and feet, you can see the grasping opposable thumb or toe. Here we have the lemur, hand and foot, the tarsier, hand and foot. The woolly spider monkey has just the opposable thumb on the foot, and the gorilla, hand and foot. Interestingly, we, as bipedal organisms, have the opposable thumb on our hand, but not on our feet. So the groups of primates are divided up into other groups as well. We have the lemurs, the tarsiers, and then we have what are called the arthropods, and the anthropoids. The anthropoids are going to be most human-like. The prefix anthro meaning like humans, right? So those that fall in that group are the monkeys, the apes, and of course the humans, both humans that are still living and ancestors of humans that are extinct. And here we can see a cladogram showing you the different suborders of primates. We have the lemurs over here, prosimi, the tarsiers, and then all of our anthropoids here. And anthropoids are even further divided. We have our Old and New World monkeys here, and we have those that are considered to be hominoids, which are made up of the gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. And then we also have the hominoids and the hominins, which are a newer group, which basically are just the humans and human ancestors that are human-like. Okay, so the only living part of that group are considered to be the human beings. That's kind of why we separate these, even though honestly this is kind of confusing, but all of these would be considered hominoids. We just have, I can find that one I was looking for earlier. Nope. So many different windows that I've had open here today. 1 second here. Oh, here we go. We have a hominoid versus hominin. And that's what this website is showing us here. This is the, if I can move this over, catch the whole screen. What's the difference? This was written last year, so this is a relatively new thing. That hominoids are the group consisting of all modern and extinct great apes. That's including modern humans, extinct human ancestors, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, right? Hominin is just modern humans and their extinct subspecies. So that's more specifically those that are human-like. Okay, so that's a term that's not in your book, but is a more kind of more precise term. And that article is dealing with how that term, the usage of hominid versus hominin has been changing. And that's something we'll see probably in the newer edition of the textbook when it comes out. Okay, looking here at just some of the organisms that fit within the primates here. We have our New World and Old World monkeys. Both of these have long tails. The difference is the New World monkeys, being found in South America and Central America, have what are called prehensile tails. They actually have tails that can grasp and hold on to things. Old World monkeys found in Africa and Asia, they don't have that. They don't have prehensile tails. Their tails can't grasp and hold on to things. And then we have the hominids. And again, I just got done telling you that the hominids includes great apes as well. So more correctly, since this is kind of, I just read about this today, we should probably change this from hominid to hominin. But like I said, that is a very new change in just the naming system. So this is our humans and our extinct human ancestors. When we look at, for example, what differentiates a human ancestor from an ape, like a gorilla or a chimpanzee, and we'll kind of show you this, I think, in the next slide a little bit better. You can see the images here. That a chimpanzee or a great ape, like a gorilla in this case, has a simple curved spine versus the complex curvature of the human spine. Lots of differences there. The differences in the shorter, broader pelvis versus the pelvis, the tall, narrow pelvis of a gorilla in this case. Obviously, we do not have an opposable toe. That's another difference. The difference between kind of how the skull is attached to the vertebra. In the case of the human, it is attached at the center base of the skull, which enables us to stand and walk upright versus having to lean forward like this, like the gorilla does. So while we have a lot of the same anatomy or anatomical structures are very similar, there are some marked differences between human skeletons and ape skeletons. We can also see those differences extending into some more kind of subtle details. For example, when you look at the teeth and the shape of the jaw of the gorilla versus the human being, we have a rectangular shaped mandible for the gorilla versus a U-shaped mandible, and just the teeth themselves. The type of teeth, the incisors are located in the front versus kind of in a curvature shape here with the humans. Of course, the size of the brain and the shape of the cranial cavity and the lack of a suborbital ridge or supraorbital ridge, excuse me, that goes above the eyeball. So looking back at kind of our most ancient ancestors, when did we have a common ancestor in common with great apes. But at what point and where do we see that kind of start to diverge in the tree of life? And the most ancient ancestor that we know of dates back to about 6 to 7 million years ago. This is pretty recent discovery, so only within the last 17 years, discovered in 2002. I'm going to try to pronounce this, but these names are not easy. So Sahelanthropus shadinus, and this most ancient of all hominids, or hominins in this case, was discovered in 2002. And what's interesting is when we see some of these more kind of ancient branches of the family tree, there's lots of new discoveries that are being made all the time. And sometimes it takes many discoveries to determine, where we actually see a new species and stuff. So this ancient ancestor was more ape-like than human-like, obviously. It looks a lot like an ape, except that we did see that was a bipedal organism, so walked on 2 legs. And that's an important evolutionary step forward. When you walk on 2 legs rather than all 4, then you have your hands free to do other things, to build, to use tools, etc., etc. We still see the shape of the skull much like the shape of the skull of the gorilla. Very similar kind of size of cranial cavity. We see a very similar supraorbital ridge on the top by the eyes there. So lots of it is very much like what we, already have seen within the, the primate or the great apes, we should say. Not as well studied as maybe the next one here, which is Australopithecus. Now, Australopithecus, there's many different species of Australopithecus. Probably the most famous one is Australopithecus africanus. And this one was discovered back in the 1970s. A skeleton by the name of Lucy was discovered, because I believe, while they were putting the skeleton together, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing by the Beatles, so they named the skeleton Lucy. It was a female, kind of a middle-aged female skeleton. And this was most definitively one of the very first upright apes. So very much ape-like in appearance, but also walked upright. Australopithecus were hominins. They were very good at walking on 2 legs, bipedal. They did, however, continue to use trees for food and protection. The first specimens were actually discovered in 1924, but the most famous one was discovered in the 1970s. That would be Lucy. They are about similar in brain size to current-day chimpanzees and gorillas. They probably ate primarily plants and were primarily plant eaters as well because of the shapes of their teeth. So you can kind of determine the diet based on the shapes of their teeth. And they were extinct by about 2 million years ago. So we see the majority of these groups of Australopithecus being extinct about 2 million years ago. Here we can see a kind of a flow chart showing you the evolution of primates. And here you can see with that, it's maybe difficult with the color, but this darker orangish color are your Australopithecus. So you can see them, and this is the one we talked about earlier that was even older. We see many different subgroups of Australopithecus. Okay, so existing earlier than, but also at the same time, is some of our Homo groups here. Remember, Homo sapiens, your genus is Homo, the species is Sapiens, but we have other groups that are considered to be in the same genus as Homo sapiens. The genus Homo. These are our guys here, or gals. Okay, so the different The different species in the genus Homo. The only species of this group that still is alive today is Homo sapiens, number 2 here. Okay, but we have Homo habilis, Homo floresiensis, Homo erectus. This one I'm not real familiar with. It doesn't have the same genus, so we're going to skip him because I don't know what the heck that is. Then we have Homo Heidelbergensis, or Bergenesis. I think it's Heidelbergensis. And then the Homo Neanderthalis. Okay, so all of these different kind of relatives to modern day humans. And we'll first look at Homo habilis. So Homo habilis appeared about 2.5 to 1.5 million years ago. Had human features that were not found in the Austria Pittacus. Slightly larger brain, but also had evidence that they used stone tools. You can see that here. It was found throughout Africa and Eurasia, even persisting to as recently as about 100,000 years ago and perhaps even more recently. They lacked the four-limb adaptations for climbing, so they were strictly terrestrial, only lived on the ground, not in the trees. And since they used tools and they were expanding kind of globally, or at least within that whole kind of Africa, Eurasia region, it's believed that they had a little bit higher cognitive capacity, so a bit smarter than their predecessors, the Australopithecus. Okay, and then we see Homo erectus, the next relative of the humans. Remember, these are all in the same genus but not the same species. So they're a little bit later than the Homo habilis. Pretty close to, like, they lived at the same time though, even though they may have come a little bit later. They were a bit smarter because they had larger brain size anyways. They had more sophisticated tools than their predecessors. Maybe even had clothing, fires, and shelter. So we see some advances in kind of their social structure as well. And they produced fairly sophisticated tools that enabled them to actually hunt big game. They were adapted to live in the cold. And, they oftentimes are considered to be the most direct relatives to modern-day Homo sapiens. It brings us to, here's the skull of the Homo erectus. You can see that there's the actual bone, and that white part in there is parts that they have to kind of fill in the gaps where there are missing pieces in the skull. Kind of put the puzzle together, okay? So let me see the most ancient form of Homo sapiens. We call them the archaic Homo sapiens. They're also known as Homo Heidelbergensis, the one we talked about earlier. When I was reading about this a little bit, it suggests that perhaps they're actually the same thing. That the Homo Heidelbergensis, or the ancient Homo sapien, really are one and the same when you look at kind of the fossil record there. And so they're the most ancient version of our modern day selves, essentially. They lived in Africa, Asia, Europe, and they later lived kind of with the Neanderthals as well. Let's see. They're somewhere between like modern day humans and the Homo erectus. So when we look back at these guys here, and like they could use better tools, they lived in groups, they had clothing, shelter, mastered fire. Well, these guys, the archaic Homo sapiens or Homo Heidelbergensis, they were a little bit more advanced than that, but not quite as advanced as modern day human beings would be. Not like obviously modern day human beings like right now, but modern humans as in those that lived. They were the same kind of form as us, but they were like thousands of years ago humans, right? And here's a picture, kind of a diagram, I guess an illustration showing those Homo Heidelbergensis, or the archaic Homo sapiens, as they attacked and killed a woolly rhino, which would have been an animal that lived during the last ice age. Okay. Comparatively, I love these pictures. It look like they're taken in like a mug or a lineup. Here we have our Homo Heidelbergensis here, also known as the archaic Homo sapiens, right? And then we have modern day humans, early modern humans, known as Cro-Magnon man here. And we have the group kind of that lived at the same time, Homo Neanderthalis. Now, these guys probably have a direct lineage to Cro-Magnon. The Neanderthals actually have their own separate branch. It's like they evolved parallel to modern day humans. Although there are some people that believe, and actually there's some DNA evidence that shows that they actually did interbreed with humans as well. So they were just a different species of humans that lived at the same time as Homo sapiens did. Okay? So the Neanderthals, they appeared about 230,000 years ago. So roughly about the same time as people, as human beings, or as Homo sapiens to be more specific. Shorter, more sturdy, have a more well-defined supraorbital ridge, so that we kind of see that. Remember, we saw that in the gorillas, but we see that here in the Neanderthals as well. A larger front teeth, likely a separate species to Homo sapiens. But again, I had some interesting reading not too long ago where I saw that there actually is DNA evidence that links Neanderthals to humans. And depending on what area of the world your ancestors come from, you are more or less likely to have Neanderthal DNA. And my understanding is if you're like European, and especially Northern European, that you probably contain a larger percentage of Neanderthal DNA than, say, if you're African or Asian. I want to show you a short video clip here too. We can watch this video that talks a little bit about the Neanderthals.
Neanderthals are often depicted as brutish cavemen, but science shows that our early ancestors were actually quite advanced. Neanderthals, or Homo Neanderthalensis, are our closest relatives in the human family tree. The species lived from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago and inhabited an area that stretched as far west as Europe's Atlantic coast and as far east as Central Asia. Their habitat reached northward to modern-day Belgium, making them the first humans to survive a cold glacial ecosystem. The North's cold environment may have influenced Neanderthals' physique. Their bodies were relatively short, with males averaging 5 feet 5 inches and females 5 feet 1 inch tall. And they were stocky, with broad chests, bulky torsos, and muscular limbs. These adaptations helped Neanderthals generate and retain body heat. Also, their noses were large and had relatively high bridges. This created a nasal chamber that warmed and humidified the cold, dry air they'd breathe in northern regions. Apart from adaptations that helped Neanderthals survive a harsh wintry habitat, the species also developed large brains. They were similar in size to modern humans' brains, and were often larger. An increase in brain size may have played a significant role in another type of adaptation: culture. Culture is indicative of an intelligent species, and archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals had a relatively sophisticated culture. They built shelters, made and wore clothing, and created advanced tools. In fact, they were the first human species to make tools out of bone, not just stone. They also created objects that served ornamental purposes. Neanderthals are suspected to be the first humans to carry out the symbolic gesture of burying their dead and adorning gravesites with flowers. Neanderthals may have also created what may be the world's oldest cave art, which was found in Spain. Despite advances in their culture, sometime after 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals mysteriously disappeared. Some scientists believe the Neanderthals were killed or outcompeted by modern humans, or Homo sapiens, who arrived in Europe at around the same time as the Neanderthals' extinction. However, another theory suggests that Neanderthals mated with modern humans and were absorbed into the humans' much larger population. That may explain why most people of European or Asian descent have 1 to 2% Neanderthal genes in their DNA. For more than 150 years, Neanderthals have perplexed anthropologists. The first Neanderthal fossil specimen was discovered in Belgium in 1829 by Philippe Charles Schmerling. However, it wasn't officially classified as Neanderthal until decades later. The first fossil to be recognized as Neanderthal and as an early human or genus Homo fossil was found in 1856 by Quareman in Germany. The new species was named Neanderthalensis after the area where the fossils were found, Neander Valley. Neanderthals' fossils tell us how evolution built them to be sturdy to survive their harsh environment. But their tools, art, and DNA tell us that their resilience also involved innovation, creativity, and social behavior, much like Homo sapiens today.
All right, so continuing on with that, so you can see that a little bit about the Neanderthal. They are, very much human-like, but slightly different in appearance, and their DNA is significantly different from the Homo sapiens. They might actually be in a completely separate species. When we see modern-day Homo sapiens, also known as Cro-Magnons, these are different from what we talked about earlier when we talked about kind of the archaic Homo sapiens. These appeared in their modern form about 100,000 years ago. That doesn't mean that we didn't have Homo sapiens before then. It's just that they were not in their modern form. That's why, like I was telling you before, that's why we see the kind of that I guess transition here between let's go back down to slide 26 for a second here. But Homo Heidelbergensis here, and then Cro-Magnon. The Homo Heidelbergensis was the predecessor to the Cro-Magnon man, or Cro-Magnon, or modern-day Homo sapiens. Slightly different in the shape of cranial cavity, as well as the obviously average height and things like that as well. Okay. So these about 100,000 years ago lacked the heavy brow ridge that we kind of see with the Neanderthals. It's a much heavier brow ridge with the Neanderthals than the Homo sapiens. Prominent chin and more complex use of weaponry and tools. Now, it doesn't mean that Homo sapiens had a larger brain. In fact, we actually see that Neanderthals have a slightly larger cranial cavity, so very likely a larger brain as well. And another kind of artist rendering of a modern-day Homo sapien using kind of the remains here. So we have a cranial cavity, a mandible kind of showing the shape of the jaw and chin, as well as some, parts of the arms and leg bones and things like that. Okay, and then we can look at how the different species of the genus Homo spread throughout Asia and all of the rest of the world. We have what's known as the out of Africa hypothesis, which probably is the most dominant hypothesis, is that most of the Homo sapiens originated in Africa and spread outward from there. But we also have what's known as the multi-regional hypothesis, and that is where you still have primarily starting in Africa, but then there's a lot of intermingling once they move out of Africa. It's slightly different in that you've got one main branch from Africa about 2 million years ago, that differentiated into other groups that then kind of had a lot of like interspecies mating and hybridization and stuff like that occurred. And this is the most common one, kind of the one we talked about here, where we see the first species of Homo primates out of Africa, Homo erectus here, and then we see Homo Heidelbergensis here, which gives rise to our modern day Homo sapiens. And notice that modern day Homo sapiens are just a separate evolutionary branch from that Homo Heidelbergensis, right? That these guys are like a kind of evolved parallel in a parallel way. Okay? And that pretty much wraps up that chapter, ladies and gents. So if you have any questions, if you have any additional comments or questions, feel free to give me a call, or you can send me a webmail message. Hopefully that helped a little bit with this part of your biology class.